Okay, today we are going to read 12 and then we're going to read the first half of chapter 13. Tomorrow you guys will finish chapter 13 and read chapter 14. But a quick recap over chapter 11. So you kind of find out more about what Jonas's job is going to be like and these memories that he is going to be receiving. So he gets the memory of snow, he gets memory of sun, all things like from our world that we have and they no longer have in their world. And then I love this part of goosebumps just thinking about it when Jonas was like, okay, what should I call you? Because you say I'm the receiver, and I think you're the receiver. And he says, call me the giver. Oh my God, you guys, just goosebumps and goosebumps because I love it so much. All right. Today we're going to read 12 more good stuff. Okay, let us get moving. You slept soundly, Jonas, his mother asked at the morning meal. No dreams? Jonas simply smiled and nodded, not ready to lie, but not willing to tell the truth. I slept very soundly, he said. Well, I wish this one would, his father said, leaning down from his chair to touch Gabriel's waving fist. The basket was on the floor beside him. In its corner, beside Gabriel's head, the stuffed hippo sat staring with its blank eyes. So do I, Mother said, rolling her eyes. He is so fretful at night. Jonas had not heard the new child during the night because, as always, he had slept soundly. But it was not true that he had had no dreams. Again and again, as he slept, he had slid down that snow-covered hill. Always in the dream, it seemed as if there were a destination, a something, he couldn't grasp what, that lay beyond the place where the thickness of snow brought the sled to a stop. He was left, upon awakening, with the feeling that he wanted, even somehow needed, to reach the something that waited in the distance. The feeling that it was good, that it was welcome, and that it was significant. But he didn't know how to get there. He tried to shed the leftover dream, gathering his schoolwork and preparing for the day. School seemed a little different today. The classes were the same: language and communications, commerce and industry, science and technology, civil procedures, and government. But during the breaks for recreation periods and the midday meal, the other new 12s were abuzz with descriptions of their first day of training. All of them talked at once, interrupting each other, hastily making the required apology for interrupting, and then forgetting again in the excitement of describing the new experiences. Jonas listened. He was very aware of his own admonition not to discuss his training, but it would have been impossible anyways. There was no way to describe to his friends what he had experienced there in the annex room. How could you describe a sled without describing a hill and snow? And how could you describe a hill and snow to someone who had never felt height or wind or that feathery magical cold? Even trained for years, as they had all been in the precision of language, what words could you use which would give another the experience of sunshine? So it was easy for Jonas to be still and to listen. All right, question. Why does Jonas find it impossible? Even if he could tell his friends about his training, why would it be impossible? Yeah, because they've never experienced any of this. They don't know what snow or hills or sleds or sun is. And how would you describe that to someone? So he couldn't even tell them, even if he wanted to. After school hours, he rode again beside Fiona to the house of the old. I looked for you yesterday, she told him, so we could ride home together. Your bike was still there, and I waited for a little while, but it was getting late, so I went on home. I apologize for making you wait, Jonas said. I accept your apology, she replied automatically. I stayed a little longer than I expected, Jonas explained. She pedaled forward silently, and he knew that she expected him to tell her why. She expected him to describe his first day of training, but to ask would have fallen into that category of rudeness. You've been doing so many volunteer hours with the old, Jonas said, changing the subject. There won't be much that you don't already know. Oh, there's lots to learn, Fiona replied. There's administrative work and the dietary rules, and punishment for disobedience. Did you know that they use a discipline wand on the old, the same as for small children? And there's occupational therapy and recreational activities and medications, and they reached the building and braked their bikes. I really think I'll like it better than school, Fiona confessed. Me too, Jonas agreed, wheeling his bike into its place. She waited for a second, as if again she expected him to go on, and then she looked at her watch, waved, and hurried towards the entrance. Pause, just to say, you guys, a discipline wand on the old people? Can you imagine? Think about your grandparents. What would they be doing that you would take a discipline wand to them? Oh my goodness. Okay, so I don't like that part of the story either. All right. Jonas stood for a moment beside his bike. Pay attention to this. Startled. It had happened again. The thing that he thought of now as seeing beyond. This time it had been Fiona who had undergone that fleeting, indescribable change. As he looked up and towards her going through the door, it happened. She changed. Actually, Jonas thought, trying to recreate it in his mind, it wasn't Fiona in her entirety. It seemed to be just her hair. And just for that flickering instant, he ran through it in his mind. Oops, sorry. It was clearly beginning to happen more often. First, the apple a few weeks ago. The next time had been the faces in the audience at the auditorium just 2 days ago. And now today, Fiona's hair. Frowning, Jonas walked towards the annex. I will ask the giver, he decided. The old man looked up smiling when Jonas entered the room. He was already seated beside the bed, and he seemed more energetic today, slightly renewed and glad to see Jonas. Welcome, he said. We must get started. You're 1 minute late. I apologize, Jonas began, and then stopped, flustered, remembering that there were to be no apologies. He removed his tunic and went to the bed. I'm 1 minute late because something happened, he explained, and I'd like to ask you about it, if you don't mind. You may ask me anything. Jonas tried to sort it out in his mind so that he could explain it clearly. I think it's what you call seeing beyond, he said. The giver nodded. Describe it, he said. Jonas told him about the experience with the apple, then the moment on the stage when he had looked out and seen the same phenomenon in the faces of the crowd. And then today, just now outside, it happened with my friend Fiona. She herself didn't change exactly, but something about her changed for a second. Her hair looked different, but not in its shape and not in its length. I can't quite. Jonas paused, frustrated by his inability to grasp and describe exactly what had occurred. Finally, he simply said, it changed. I don't know how or why, and that's why I was 1 minute late, he concluded, and he looked questioningly at the giver. To his surprise, the old man asked him a question which seemed unrelated to the seeing beyond. When I gave you the memory yesterday, the first one, the ride on the sled, did you look around? Jonas nodded. Yes, he said, but the stuff, the snow in the air, made it hard to see anything. Did you look at the sled? Jonas thought back. No, I only felt it under me. I dreamt of it last night too, but I don't remember seeing the sled in my dream either, just feeling it. The giver seemed to be thinking. When I was observing you before this election, I perceived that you probably had the capacity, and what you describe confirms that. It happened somewhat differently to me, the giver told him. When I was just your age, about to become the new receiver, I began to experience it, though it took a different form. With me, it was... Oh, you guys, pause. Sorry. Okay. For me, it was... Well, I won't describe that now. You wouldn't understand it yet. But I think I can guess how it's happening with you. Let me just make a little test to confirm my guess. Lie down. Jonas lay on the bed with his hands at his sides. He felt comfortable here now. He closed his eyes and waited for the familiar feel of the giver's hands on his back. But it didn't come. Instead, the giver instructed him, call back the memory of the ride on the sled, just the beginning of it, where you're at the top of the hill before the slide starts. And this time, look down at the sled. Jonas was puzzled. He opened his eyes. Excuse me, he said politely, but don't you have to give me the memory? It's your memory now. It's not mine to experience any longer. I gave it away. But how can I call it back? Well, you can remember last year or the year that you were a 7 or a 5, can't you? Of course. Well, it's much the same. Everyone in the community has one generation memories like those, but now you'll be able to go back farther. Try, just concentrate. Jonas closed his eyes again. He took a deep breath and sought the sled and the hill and the snow in his consciousness. There they were with no effort. He was again sitting in that whirling world of snowflakes atop the hill. Jonas grinned with delight and blew his own steamy breath into view. Then, as he had been instructed, he looked down. He saw his own hands, furred again with snow, holding the rope. He saw his legs and moved them aside for a glimpse of the sled beneath. Dumbfounded, he stared at it. This time it was not a fleeting impression. This time the sled had, and continued to have, as he blinked and stared at it again, the same mysterious quality that the apple had had so briefly, and Fiona's hair. But the sled did not change. It simply was, whatever the thing was. Jonas opened his eyes and was still on the bed. The giver was watching him curiously. Yes, Jonas said slowly. I saw it in the sled. Let me try one more thing. Look over there to the bookcase. Do you see the very top row of books? The ones behind the table on the top shelf? Jonas sought them with his eyes. He stared at them and they changed. But the change was fleeting. It slipped away the next instant. It happened, Jonas said. It happened to the books, but it went away again. I'm right then, the giver said. You're beginning to see the color red. The what? The giver sighed. Oh, how to explain this? Once, back in the time of the memories, everything had a shape and a size, the way things still do, but they also had a quality called color. Okay, pause. Pause. What is Jonas's capacity to see beyond? What does that mean? Good. Jonas is starting to see color. Do you have some questions about this right now? I bet you do. We are going to keep reading, and I think it will answer your questions. There were a lot of colors, and one of them was called red, and that's the one you're starting to see. Your friend Fiona has red hair. It's quite distinctive, actually. I've noticed it before. When you mentioned Fiona's hair, it was the clue that told me you were probably beginning to see the color red. And the faces of people? The ones I saw at the ceremony? The giver shook his head. No, flesh isn't red, but it has red tones in it. There was a time, actually, and you'll see this in the memories later, when flesh was many different colors. That was before we went to sameness. Today, flesh is all the same, and what you saw was the red tones. Probably when you saw the faces take on color, it wasn't as deep or vibrant as the apple or your friend's hair. The giver chuckled suddenly. We've never completely mastered sameness. I suppose the genetic scientists are still hard at work trying to work the kinks out. Hair like Fiona's must drive them crazy. Pause. Okay, so he tells us a little bit more about this. What is that called when they got rid of the people seeing color and the different colors of skin? What was that called? Yeah, that's called sameness. So they decided to go to sameness. Okay, and that's where everything is the same. Jonas listened, trying hard to comprehend. And the sled, he said, it had that same thing, the color red. But it didn't change, Giver. It just was. Because it's a memory from the time when color was. Oh, it was so... Oh, I wish language were more precise. That red was so beautiful. The giver nodded. It is. And do you see it all the time? I see all of them, all the colors. Will I? Of course, when you receive the memories. You have the capacity to see beyond. You will gain wisdom then, along with colors, and lots more. Jonas wasn't interested just then in wisdom. It was the colors that fascinated him. Why can't everyone see them? Why did colors disappear? The giver shrugged. Our people made that choice, the choice to go to sameness. Before my time, before the previous time, back and back and back. We relinquished color when we relinquished sunshine and did away with differences. He thought for a moment. We gained control of many things, but we had to let go of others. Well, we shouldn't have, Jonas said fiercely. The giver looked startled at the certainty of Jonas's reaction, and then he smiled wryly. Well, you've come very quickly to that conclusion, he said. It took me many years. Maybe your wisdom will come much more quickly than mine. He glanced at the wall clock. Lie back down now. We have so much to do. Giver, Jonas asked as he arranged himself again on the bed, how did it happen to you when you were becoming the receiver? You said that the seeing beyond happened to you, but not in the same way. The hands came to his back. Another day, the giver said gently. I'll tell you another day. Now we must work, and I have thought of a way to help you with the concept of color. Close your eyes and be still now. I'm going to give you a memory of a rainbow. I love it. Okay, so the reason why they went to sameness is because they were gaining control. They got rid of all differences, right? So they want everything to be perfect, and they gained control of a lot. But then because of that, they also had to let things go. And how does Jonas feel about that? How does Jonas feel about going to sameness and having to let things like color go? Yeah, he says, well, we shouldn't have done that. And the giver says, well, maybe your wisdom's going to come a lot more quickly than mine did. All right. Chapter 13. Days went by and weeks. Jonas learned through the memories the names of colors, and now he began to see them all in his ordinary life, although he knew it was ordinary no longer and would never be again. But they didn't last. There would be a glimpse of green, the landscaped lawn around the central plaza, a bush on the riverbank, the bright orange of pumpkins being trucked in from the agricultural fields beyond the community boundary. Seen in an instant, the flash of brilliant color, but gone again, returning to their flat and hueless shade. The giver told him it would be a very long time before he had the colors to keep. But I want them, Jonas said angrily. It isn't fair that nothing has color. Not fair? The giver looked at Jonas curiously. Explain what you mean. Well, Jonas had to stop and think it through. If everything's the same, then there aren't any choices. And I want to wake up in the morning and I want to decide things. A blue tunic or a red one? He looked down at himself, at the colorless fabric of his clothing. But it's all the same, always. Then he laughed a little. I know it's not important what you wear, it doesn't matter, but it's the choosing that's important, isn't it? The giver asked him. Jonas nodded. My little brother, he began and then corrected himself. No, that's inaccurate. He's not my brother, not really, but this new child that my family takes care of, his name's Gabriel. Yes, I know about Gabriel. Well, he is right at the age where he's learning so much, and he grabs toys when we hold them in front of him. My father says he's learning small muscle control, and he's really cute. The giver nodded. But now that I can see colors, at least sometimes, I was just thinking, what if we could hold up things that were bright red or bright yellow, and he could choose instead of the sameness? He might make wrong choices. Oh, Jonas was silent for a minute. Oh, I see what you mean. It wouldn't matter for a new child's toy, but later it does matter, doesn't it? We don't dare to let people make choices on their own. Not safe, the giver suggested. Oh, it's definitely not safe, Jonas said with certainty. What if they were allowed to choose their own mate and they chose wrong? Or what if, he went on, almost laughing at the absurdity, they chose their own jobs? It's frightening, isn't it? The giver said. Jonas chuckled. Oh, it's very frightening. I can't even imagine it. We really have to protect people from wrong choices. It's safer. Yes, Jonas agreed. It's much safer. Okay. I hope you're also chuckling at this part because you realize he's basically describing our world, right? And he's like, oh, that would be crazy if people chose their own jobs. And why is it, why is that thought, I'm trying to think of the right question, sorry. Why is that thought crazy to think of? Like, why can't they let people make choices on their own? Why can't they let people decide if they want a blue tunic or a red tunic? Why is it bad to let them make choices on their own? Yeah, it's not safe. What if they chose wrong? If you choose the wrong spouse, what can happen? Divorce. And that's not perfect in their world. And if you choose the wrong job, what can happen? Well, you might not have a job for a while, and that's not perfect in their world. So they can't allow people to make their own choices. Okay. But when the conversation turned to other things, Jonas was left still with a feeling of frustration that he didn't understand. He found that he was often angry now, irrationally angry at his groupmates, that they were satisfied with their lives, which had none of the vibrance his own was taking on. And he was angry at himself that he couldn't change that for them. He tried, without asking permission from the giver, because he feared or knew that it would be denied, he tried to give his new awareness to his friends. Asher, Jonas said one morning, look at those flowers very carefully. They were standing beside a bed of geraniums planted near the Hall of Open Records. He put his hands on Asher's shoulders and concentrated on the red of the petals, trying to hold it as long as he could and trying at the same time to transmit the awareness of red to his friend. What's the matter? Asher asked uneasily. Is something wrong? He moved away from Jonas's hands. It was extremely rude for one citizen to touch another outside of family units. No, nothing. I thought for a minute they were wilting, and we should let the gardening crew know they needed more watering. Jonas sighed and turned away. One evening he came home from his training, weighted with new knowledge. The giver had chosen a startling and disturbing memory that day. Under the touch of his hands, Jonas had found himself suddenly in a place that was completely alien, hot and windswept under a vast blue sky. There were tufts of sparse grass, a few bushes and rocks, and nearby he could see an area of thicker vegetation, broad, low trees outlined against the sky. He could hear noises, the sharp crack of weapons. He perceived the word guns and then shouts and an immense crashing thud as something fell, tearing branches from the trees. He heard voices calling to one another, peering from the place where he stood hidden behind some shrubbery. He was reminded of what the giver had told him, that there had been a time when flesh had different colors. Two of these men had dark brown skin, the others were light. Going closer, he watched them hack the tusks from a motionless elephant on the ground and haul them away spattered with blood. He felt himself overwhelmed with a new perception of the color he knew as red. Then the men were gone, speeding towards the horizon in a vehicle that spit pebbles from its whirling tires. One hit his forehead and stung him there. But the memory continued, although Jonas ached now for it to end. Now he saw another elephant emerge from the place where it had stood hidden in the trees. Very slowly it walked to the mutilated body and looked down. With its sinuous trunk it stroked the huge corpse. Then it reached up, broke some leafy branches with a snap, and draped them over the mass of torn, thick flesh. Finally it tilted its massive head, raised its trunk, and roared into the empty landscape. Jonas had never heard such a sound. It was the sound of rage and grief, and it seemed never to end. He could still hear it when he opened his eyes and lay anguished on the bed, where he received the memories. It continued to roar into his consciousness as he pedaled slowly home. Lily, he asked that evening when his sister took her comfort object, the stuffed elephant, from the shelf, did you know that once there really were elephants? Live ones? She glanced down at the ragged comfort object and grinned. Right, she said skeptically. Sure, Jonas. Jonas went and sat beside them while his father untidied Lily's hair ribbons and combed her hair. He placed one hand on each of their shoulders. With all of his being, he tried to give each of them a piece of the memory, not of the tortured cry of the elephant, but of the being of the elephant, of the towering, immense creature, and the meticulous touch with which it had tended to its friend at the end. But his father had continued to comb Lily's long hair, and Lily, impatient, had finally wiggled under her brother's touch. "Jonas," she said, "you're hurting me with your hand." "I apologize for hurting you, Lily," Jonas mumbled, and took his hand away. "Accept your apology," Lily responded indifferently, stroking the lifeless elephant. Okay, so this is where we're stopping for today, okay? One final question. What happens when Jonas tries to give the memory of the elephant to his father and Lily? Yeah, it doesn't work, and they don't believe him that this is real because they can't understand it. All right, we will finish up chapter 13 tomorrow.